74 combat clashes have been recorded on the front since the beginning of the day. This was reported by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. The most intense situations are in the Konstantinivka, Pokrovsk and Oleksandrivka directions. More details about the situation on the front line are coming up next.
In the Lyman direction, Ukrainian units demonstrated effective action against the Russian occupiers. The soldiers of the 53rd Separate Mechanized Brigade, named after Prince Volodymyr Monomakh, reported a nighttime interception during which the enemy attempted to use the heavy flamethrower system Solntsepyok. The Russians set up their position but received a prompt response from the Ukrainian defenders in the form of an FPV drone attack.
Our strategic defensive operation has in fact led to this format of active defense today. This approach allows us to liberate positions that were previously truly lost. Moreover, it enables us to carry out those counterattacks that improve our tactical situation. It's not just about reclaiming territory, but most importantly, about pushing back the Russian occupation forces and to exhaust them as much as possible to the extent that is possible today. Because, well, the enemy's tactics have changed over this time. You can see that the tactic of 1,000 cuts, which the Russians, by the way, copied from the Ukrainian defense forces, is now being widely used by the Russians, which has slightly reduced the overall number of Russians killed and wounded. Nevertheless, we see that the Russian army's current activity immediately leads to heavy losses for the enemy.
Meanwhile, in the Konstantinovka direction, the enemy launched assaults near Sherbinovka, Pleshevka and Rusinoyar. On the Pokrovsk section of the front, Russian invaders attacked in the areas of Vladimir Mirolubovka, Krasny Lyman, Kotlin, Udakhny and Kotlyarovka. And in the Alexandrovsk direction, the Russian army tried to push back Ukrainian defenders from their positions near the settlements of Sosnovka, Novonikolayevka, Novogrigorovka and Malinovka.
The summer campaign, which was widely advertised and announced by the Russians, is of course from that offensive. It was bloody for the Russians, it was very difficult and continues to be difficult for us because today it's a different format. Today it's already the autumn-winter phase of that same offensive. However, the Russians have not achieved even operational tactical successes as of today. Even though the forces thrown into the infantry components today, into all these directions, are just an insane number of troops, in some places many times more than the number of our assault troops, our infantry. However, today we see the result.
The defense forces struck a Russian Buk M1 surface-to-air missile system deployed near Tokmak in the Zaporizhzhia region. The exact coordinates were identified and passed on to the Ukrainian armed forces by partisans from the Atesh movement. They also provided information about the duty schedules, crews, missile delivery routes, and reload times. Since the beginning of 2025, Ukrainian forces have destroyed 45 fuel and energy as well as military-industrial facilities in Russia. This was reported by the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Syrsky. He noted that the strikes on targets within Russian territory as part of Operation Deep Strike have been the most effective throughout the entire war.
Since the beginning of the year, successful fire strikes have been carried out on 45 fuel and energy, as well as military-industrial facilities in Russia. The total production volume of fuel and lubricants in Russia has decreased by almost 25%. Every day, due to the decline in petroleum product exports, the aggressor country loses more than $46 million. Oleksandr Syrsky, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Facebook.
Mass desertion in the Russian army. Over 25,000 soldiers and officers have left units of the Central Military District of the Russian Federation in the past 9 months. According to Ukrainian intelligence, they are fleeing their positions, not returning from leave or after medical treatment. There are cases where servicemen take weapons and equipment with them. The main reasons for the mass desertion are hazing, lack of necessary supplies, and being sent on so-called meat assaults.
In addition, in the internal reports of the occupying forces, failure to follow orders is listed as a cause of death. Over the past year, more than 30 such cases have been documented, which in fact points to a systematic practice of executing Russian soldiers who refuse to be sacrificed for the Kremlin's ambitions. From a statement by the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine on Telegram,
and over the past day, Ukraine's defense forces have eliminated 1,150 Russian servicemen. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the total losses of the Russian army since the start of the full-scale aggression have exceeded 1,129,000 personnel. In addition, over the past day, 1 Russian tank, 2 armored combat vehicles, 41 artillery systems, 2 multiple rocket launch systems, 1 air defense system, and 131 units of enemy automotive and special equipment were destroyed.
Austria has agreed to accept the new package of European Union sanctions against Russia, thereby removing a key obstacle to the vote. This was reported by the Reuters news agency. Vienna demanded the unfreezing of part of Russia's assets in order to compensate for the losses of one of Austria's banks at their expense. The institution suffered due to fines imposed on it by the Russian regime. However, other EU countries did not support this demand. And since the package requires unanimous approval from all 27 member states, this is likely why Austria ultimately declared its support for the sanctions, Reuters writes. The foreign ministers of the European Union will vote on the adoption of the restrictions in Luxembourg on Monday, October 20th. Russians are actively recruiting so-called disposable spies, according to Ukraine's Foreign Intelligence Service. They recalled that since February 2022, the Russian intelligence network in Europe has been dismantled as European special services expelled about 700 Russian spies who were operating under the cover of Russian diplomatic missions since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Later, Russian special services switched to recruiting civilian residents of European countries, fully aware of the inevitability. Instead of their own agents, Russia is recruiting so-called disposable spies. Their goal is to gather information or to carry out a specific task.
Overall, since 2022, 130 people in 12 European countries have been suspected of working for Russia. Russian recruiters actively use the internet, social networks, church communities, sports clubs, and mass events to search for potential operatives. Such people are usually recruited only once to obtain information or to carry out specific tasks in the interests of the aggressor. This is part of the Kremlin's hybrid strategy aimed at undermining the security of European countries. From a statement by the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine.
Another 8 young Ukrainians were able to be returned from occupation on October 16th. The youngest boy is only 1.5 years old, while the oldest girl is a 17-year-old teenager. The children are now receiving all the necessary assistance, their documents are being restored, and they are being helped to adapt to their new lives. According to official data from the Ukrainian authorities, more than 20,000 children from Ukraine ended up in Russia or in temporarily occupied territories. In reality, of course, the number could be several times higher. What those who have returned from occupation have to say is in our report.
The Russians stole my child's childhood.
7-year-old Andriy spent almost half his life under occupation. When the full-scale war began, he was only 4 years old. For 3 years, the boy hardly left the house. He was afraid of explosions and didn't understand why Russian flags were hanging everywhere. This year, the child was supposed to start school. That's when his mother says she decided to leave.
We were welcomed, fed, and supported. We were truly happy that we finally ended up at home. And my son shouted, "At last! Ukraine is no longer
a secret." 13-year-old Dmitro spent 8 months in Russian captivity. Back in 2022, his family left Donetsk region for Finland via Russia. But the boy always wanted to return home. He says that in Finland he felt like an outsider because of the different culture and language. However, as soon as he crossed the Finnish-Russian border, Russian soldiers immediately put handcuffs on him.
Well, they tightened the handcuffs so much that my wrists became very swollen. They pinned my shoulder to the ground with the butt of a rifle, so I definitely couldn't get up. They told me, "Why do you want to leave? You live fine in Russia, stay in Russia. After you turn 18, you'll study, you'll work." I don't know. I just kept saying, yes, of course, but I was really just waiting for someone to come get me because I really wanted to go home.
The boy spent 8 months in the orphanage. All this time, his mother was trying to bring her child back home.
I wrote to the Ukrainian ombudsman. I wrote to the Ukrainian ombudsman Lubinets as well as to the Russian one. I sent requests to Kiev and Moscow. Someone from the Kiev office of the Ukrainian ombudsman contacted me. They interviewed me to understand the situation. Kiev and Moscow started working directly with each other. Thanks to this, I was able to bring my child home after 8 months.
The exact number of Ukrainian children deported to Russia or relocated to territories it controls since the start of the full-scale invasion is still unknown. According to official Ukrainian data, since the end of February 2022, more than 20,000 underage Ukrainians have ended up in Russia and in temporarily occupied territories. President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky stated that thanks to the Bring Kids Back UA initiative, Ukraine was able to return from Russia
1,625 young children in total. For years we have fought to bring our children home, and we need real results. Real ones. And that means the actual return of all abducted Ukrainian children. It is fair and symbolic that the first crime Putin is accused of is his crime against children. And I thank every country that will enforce the International Criminal Court's warrant for the arrest of Putin and other individuals responsible for the abduction of minors. This is important and it cannot be forgiven.
The issue of Ukrainian children abducted by Russia is being addressed by the wife of the US President, Melania Trump. She wrote a letter to the Russian dictator, which before the start of the summit in Alaska on August 15, 2025, Putin handed over to Donald Trump. In her letter, Melania Trump asked the head of the Kremlin regime to protect children and to care for future generations around the world.
She really wants to help children. She truly did a great job in working to bring the children back. Some say there are 20,000 of them, others say only 300. That's a big difference, but no one knows for sure. However, she is very compassionate toward children and always tries to help them.
On October 16th, another 8 Ukrainian children were successfully returned from occupation to Ukraine. Russian security forces nearly took a 1.5-year-old boy away from his mother after finding evidence on her phone that she knew a Ukrainian soldier. According to the head of the office of the President of Ukraine, Andriy Yermak, Russian soldiers beat and interrogated the relatives of a 17-year-old girl right in front of her. But every time, the Russian side drags out the negotiation process. That is why an international coalition is now helping to bring Ukrainian children back. 40 countries have already joined this coalition. Natalia Husuk, Anime Shtengelov for Freedom TV channel.
The labor market in Belarus is severely unbalanced due to the ineffective work of Lukashenko's administration. According to the Ukrainian Foreign Intelligence Service, there are currently more than 177,000 open vacancies in the country. This is 12,000 more than a year ago and almost 40,000 more than 2 years ago. Many sectors are experiencing a shortage of workers, and wages are rising faster than labor productivity, which negatively affects the economy. Due to price controls, businesses are losing money. Many cannot cope with expenses and are going bankrupt. Moreover, in recent years, hundreds of thousands of specialists have left the country. This makes the problem even worse. Lukashenko publicly reprimanded officials for the economic failure. He admitted that dependence on Russia has turned into a crisis for Belarus. The dictator advised managers to get up from their chairs and look, quote, much further than the traditional Russian market. Where Lukashenko is aiming will be explained by my colleague Victoria Chistyukina.
A decline in industry, a sharp drop in export volumes and inflation. Lukashenko stated that the leading sectors of Belarus's economy are in recession. Lukashenko considers the main reason for the country's problems to be the economic crisis in Russia.
The gross domestic product increased by less than 2% over 8 months. In terms of growth rates, agriculture failed to reach last year's level.
The Belarusian dictator admitted that it is no longer possible to ignore the economic crisis in Russia. After all, 67% of Belarus's exports and 56% of its imports are with the Federation. Therefore, according to him, the growth plan for the Belarusian economy next year is rather vague.
The report by Prime Minister Turchin to Lukashenko only confirmed the obvious. A systemic industrial crisis is brewing in the country. And foreign economic cooperation with Russia no longer saves the situation, but only makes it worse. Well, let's supply oil then. To the Russian Federation, petroleum products, I apologize again, supplying petroleum products to the Russian Federation, so what? Will that improve the situation for Belarusians? And what will happen to prices for petroleum products on the domestic market?
Import substitution in Russia has completely failed, and sanctions against the aggressor country and its ally are only getting stronger. The international isolation of Moscow and Minsk leaves Lukashenko with no choice. He is frantically trying to find a way out and hopes to achieve a softening of Western sanctions. According to Reuters, Lukashenko has tasked Yuri Ambrazovich, the former deputy foreign minister of Belarus and now the ambassador to the Vatican, with negotiating with Europe.
In an email, a copy of which was reviewed by Reuters, it was stated that Ambrazovich is now informally responsible for coordinating Belarusian diplomatic contacts in the capitals of Western Europe, and it included a proposal to hold meetings in Paris on October 6th, 8th or 9th. The Belarusian embassy told Reuters that Ambrazovich had requested several meetings with fellow ambassadors accredited in France in accordance with standard diplomatic practice. From a Reuters publication.
Lukashenko publicly calls Donald Trump a friend, does not hold back on compliments, and is clearly counting on a thaw in relations. In September, U.S. Presidential Representative John Cole met with the Belarusian leader in Minsk and announced the lifting of American sanctions against the company Belarus. In response, at Donald Trump's request, the dictator released 52 prisoners. In the summer, political prisoners were released from prison after a visit to Belarus by Tokelog.
One of Lukashenko's main goals is to ease sanctions on Belarusian potash fertilizers, the world's only leader in the production of this product, as well as to restore access for this landlocked country to Baltic ports for their transportation, according to a Reuters publication.
Experts are convinced that the collapse of the Belarusian economy is inevitable. Industrial enterprises in Belarus survive mainly thanks to government orders from Russia, primarily military ones. And Belarusian goods are sold at prices that benefit Moscow, not Minsk. Oil refining has dropped significantly. As early as this spring, Lukashenko was forced to admit that the survival of domestic oil refineries was at stake.
Against the backdrop of failures in industry and trade, Lukashenko has planned a budget deficit of about 4.5 billion rubles for 2025. This is more than 1.5% of GDP. Earning money honestly isn't working out, and the regime is once again looking for someone to squeeze. So who will Lukashenko squeeze this time to replenish the meager treasury? Under the slogans of justice, the regime is introducing new taxes and fees and raising them. Utilities for so-called parasites are going up, and businesses are being forced to pay a wealth tax.
European diplomats are viewing Lukashenko's activity with great caution. After all, Belarus remains not only an economic platform but also a military testing ground for the Kremlin. In September, Minsk and Moscow held joint military exercises. Lukashenko himself periodically threatens the West with consequences for supporting Ukraine.
Ukraine's ambassador to the U.S., Olga Stefanishina, spoke about the main outcomes of Volodymyr Zelensky's visit to Washington. The Ukrainian president informed Donald Trump about the situation on the front lines, the consequences of Russian missile strikes on Ukraine's energy system, and the country's most urgent defense needs. The ambassador wrote about this on her Telegram channel. According to Stefanishina, the presidents agreed that the United States, together with its European partners, should play a key role in ensuring Ukraine's security. She added that the Ukrainian side is counting on increased pressure on Russia to end the war. Ukraine needs a peace plan. This was stated by German Chancellor Friedrich Merz after a conversation between European leaders, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, and US President Donald Trump. Merz noted that Europe will increase its support for Kyiv in order to persuade Russia to come to the negotiating table. There are plans to strengthen sanctions against Moscow and to use frozen Russian assets. Germany and its partners, according to her, fully support Ukraine. Merz was also supported by Finnish President Alexander Stubb. He stated that no one wants this war to end more than the Ukrainians themselves.
President Zelensky has the full support of Germany and his European friends on the path to peace. After his meeting with President Trump, we coordinated and will accompany the next steps. Right now, Ukraine needs a peace plan. Friedrich Merz, Chancellor of Germany, on social network X. We firmly support Ukraine. This includes military and financial assistance, security guarantees, a ceasefire, and a peace process. The work continues. No one wants this war to end more than the Ukrainians. Alexander Stubb, President of Finland, on social network X.
Despite Donald Trump's ambiguous response, Volodymyr Zelensky still hopes that the American president will supply Ukraine with Tomahawk missiles. Zelensky stated this on NBC News after a meeting at the White House. According to the Ukrainian leader, Trump did not say no to Tomahawk missiles for Ukraine. Zelensky believes that Putin is afraid the US will eventually supply these missiles to the Ukrainians and that the Ukrainian armed forces will use them against Russian territory.